I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers. It's January 11, 2024. All managers are present except Manager Miller and Manager Maxwell. Senator Zainab Mohammed is our guest this evening. Did you want to say anything during the public comment? You're very welcome to come forward.
I think you're just going to have to add a little without a mic for just a moment since I didn't get it prepared.
I can just speak up.
Yeah.
If you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Very nice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here with all of you. And I just want to take a moment to thank President White for the wonderful welcome, and James and Whisker and the wonderful staff who've been really gracious and helpful in helping me understand all the issues. And I want to take a moment to also appreciate the opportunity to learn more about the service and groundwater issues that are around Lake Nokomis, which is in my district, and which is an issue that's so important to my constituents. I've learned so much about today water and land. Which is something I never thought I'd think about when I was running for office. But it's been an issue that's been a theme that's come up while I was running, and the staff had taken a lot of time in President White to just sort of help me understand how these issues work and what we can do as a community when we're developing and how we can do it in a healthy way. And I won't take up too much time, but I also want to thank you for your service and your commitment to our communities and for serving and for just for allowing me to be here today as well.
Thank you for coming, Senator.
Welcome.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Hijmati, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we have approval of the minutes of the January 11th board meeting. Oops. Yeah. And approval of the check registers for the general checking account, surety checking account wire transfers, and 4 resolutions. 007 authorizes renewal of the Metro Watershed Partners membership. 8 is approval to continue the joint funding agreement with USGS for the gauging stations and technical assistance. 9 is approval of the Minneapolis programmatic maintenance agreement, and 10 is approval of the district fee schedule. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Hijmati moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus seconds. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? This, as my report, I will say that we, James Whisker and I, and Manager Hijmati, met with commissioners this last week. James and I met with Commissioner Green, who was very interested in us talking about the St. Louis Park projects, of course, in her district. And then Manager Hijmati and Mr. Whisker and I met with Commissioner Conley, and she mentioned particularly that it's important that there be early and no surprise communications with the community, which gave James an opportunity to explain the coordinated communications with the 3 agencies that's part of the cooperative agreement, and that talk about the timing of when those communications will come out, and assure her that there will be no surprises there. The community will know. Also, on Monday evening, James addressed the Minnetrista City Council meeting. I was able to be there. He talked about the Lake Minnetonka strategy, 6 Mile Halstead Bay, and the mayor asked some very knowledgeable questions and expressed especially an interest in the alum dosing station on the creek. So she was very, very informed. The Citizens Advisory Committee meeting, Manager Maxwell is not here. Was someone going to give a report? Ms. Samal? Yeah.
Good evening, Board of Managers and President White. There we go. The Citizens Advisory Committee meeting last week Manager Maxwell was the board liaison. We received a presentation from James Whisker on the year ahead, where he highlighted MCWD's key initiatives and projects that we'll be working on in 2024. The Citizens Advisory Committee also elected their 2024 Executive Committee, which resulted in Chair Richard Nyquist, Vice Chair Dan Flo, and then Executive Officers Emily Ballo and Robert Gliski, who is a new member as of last year. We also welcomed some new members, which include Sherry Wallace, Kara Donovan, and Janet Schaefer of Long Lake. And that is all. Any questions on the CAC meeting? Or
Manager Mahdi?
What kind of onboarding do you do for new members?
Yes, excuse me, I'm a little out of breath because we were putting some stuff away. The Citizens Advisory Committee new members go through a 4-step process, essentially, to complete their onboarding. The first step is a short orientation that we do before their first CAC meeting of the year, just to orient them to what to expect at their first meeting. Then they participate in that first meeting the year ahead, where the administrator gives them an overview of the projects and initiatives on the docket. And then after that first meeting of the year, we go through 2 more in-depth informational sessions where we look back at MCW's history, outline the key principles that guide our work, our mission, vision, organizational structure, etc. And then in our second informational session, we dive in on the specific projects and initiatives that we're currently working on and make sure that our Citizens Advisory Committee members have a strong understanding of our work so they're prepared to engage in subsequent meetings. And the final piece of the onboarding experience really is a field trip where we go out and visit one of our project sites and engage sometimes the board and staff like we did last year. And that's really how we wrap up the onboarding for those new members.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.
Metro Watershed's quarterly meeting was recent. The presentation was by Connie Fortin of Bolton and Menk, who talked about low salt site design and gave examples of some of the strategies. Something that was new to me was the idea of snow gardens, and she said there'll be a Wikipedia page soon, so we can all read about snow gardens that comparable to rain gardens. Under the agency and association reports, I'll just note a couple of things. The summer tour will be June 25 to 27 for Minnesota Watersheds, hosted by Capital Region and Ramsey-Washington Metro Region. The CWC strategic plan is out for comments, and the Met Council Advisory Committee are working on the water policy plans. Mr. Whisker was mentioned as being included in that, and Mr. Steve Christopher is working on that outreach, so that's a name that we know. Yes, Bill.
There was you had mentioned Connie with her presentation on low salt design. One of the things that stood out is that she has driven with literally hundreds of snowplow drivers. And almost universally, they all tell her, we don't design for low salt. And she'll say, well, what do you mean we don't design for low salt? They said they'll take a lot and put up a big apartment building. And where do they locate the parking lot? In the shade, so that the cars don't get the heat in the summertime. But guess what never thaws out in the wintertime? So they need lots of salt in those parking lots because they're always in the shade. She says the way roads are designed and the way islands in the middle of parking lots are designed, she said the life of an island in a parking lot is trees and vegetation, second year, some trees, third year, everything's dead. And she said that's just from the salt diet that they've been given. So it's an attempt on their part to try to talk to designers to see if there's something that can be done to make things better designed for a low salt appetite.
You
Thank
could go
you.
Vail style and just heat it.
It's a solution.
There's always a way.
Thank you.
Thanks for the addition there, Amanda Olson. The upcoming meetings are printed in our agenda, and we'll now turn to the permit 23-534. Mr. Jonas presenting.
There we go. Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. Tonight, I will be providing you with a briefing on permit 23534, a single-family home reconstruction that is seeking a variance from the floodplain alteration rule. This rule requires that no net fill is created below the 100-year floodplain elevation and that 2 feet of vertical separation or freeboard is maintained at all low openings of the structure. The applicants are able to meet the district's compensatory storage requirement, but due to site constraints caused by a shared driveway and driveway slope requirements, which I will outline later in the presentation, they are unable to meet the vertical separation requirements for the garage's low openings. Because of that, the applicants are requesting a variance from the freeboard requirements for the low openings of the garage. If approved, this project will take place at 2001 Arbor Lane within the city of Mound on Harrison's Bay of Lake Minnetonka. I will also note that Julie and Grant Johnson, the applicant's contractors, are sitting back there and are able to answer any potential questions that fall out of the scope of what staff reviewed. So this presentation will provide an overview of the project, including the project location and the proposed work, as well as a summary on the variance request. The presentation will end with time for questions and discussion before the board deliberation. So first, I'll provide an overview on the project's location. As mentioned previously, the project is located within the city of Mound on Harrison Bay. The site is surrounded by water on 3 sides and water that leaves the site through overland flow into the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed. Next, I'll provide you a summary of the work and the permit triggers. This project is proposing to tear down and rebuild the single-family home and the associated garage. The parcel is surrounded by water on 3 sides, as I previously mentioned, and only has access through the use of a shared driveway easement, which crosses 3 parcels to the south of the project area. You can see that shared driveway outlined in red. The work triggers both the erosion control and floodplain alteration rules. The erosion control rule is triggered because the project proposes to move approximately 250 cubic yards of material. And the floodplain alteration rule is triggered because land will be disturbed below the 100-year floodplain elevation of 931.5. So now onto the erosion control rule. The applicant has met the intent and criteria of the erosion control rule by providing an erosion sediment control plan that indicates best management practices. These practices include a rock construction entrance shown in yellow, silt fence around the entire project area shown in red, and permanent stabilization following the work. Because of that, staff find that the requirements of the erosion and sediment control rule have been met. Now for the floodplain alteration rule. As I previously mentioned, this rule is triggered by land disturbance below the 100-year floodplain elevation. And again, this elevation for Lake Minnetonka is 931.5 feet. The applicant's current plan set includes cut and fill calculations that show that this project will create an additional 9 cubic yards of floodplain storage compared to the existing condition. This net cut meets the requirement of the rule. However, due to lake setback requirements, the location of the shared driveway easement, and slope requirements for the driveway, the applicants are unable to meet the vertical separation requirement of the floodplain alteration rule. Again, this rule requires that low openings of principal structures are 2 feet above the 100-year floodplain elevation. So for this site, that would require that the low openings are located at an elevation of 933.5 or higher. While the low openings of the home meet the rule, the 2 low openings of the garage are at an elevation of 932.1 and do not meet the rule. Thus, the applicants have requested a variance on the vertical separation requirements for the low openings of the garage. I will also note that initially the applicants had submitted plans that created 37 cubic yards of flood storage, but left the garage at an elevation of 931.5. After engineer review, it was determined that the flood storage could be reduced to allow for the garage elevation to be raised. Following feedback from district staff and engineer, the applicants produced their current plan set, which both maximizes the amount of vertical separation created, while also maintaining no net fill within the floodplain and at the acceptable driveway slope. Now on to the basis of the variance. As I mentioned previously, there are a couple constraints that make it difficult to meet the rule on this site. The first is the lake setback requirement of 25 feet, and the next is the fact that the only access to the site is through that shared driveway easement, which cannot be relocated. This has left the applicants little flexibility with regards to where the structure can be placed. Additionally, the applicants have demonstrated that they are meeting the vertical separation requirement of the rule to the maximum extent feasible. Due to site constraints, there's a limited amount of space for the driveway to exist, which means that any elevation changes lead to a proportionate change in the driveway slope. The applicants have determined that they are able to raise the garage to an elevation of 932.1 feet, while maintaining a typically accepted engineering slope for driveways of 5%. Any additional fill would both create a potentially hazardous driveway slope and also lead to net fill below the floodplain elevation, which would then require an additional less desirable variance from the district for compensatory storage. I'll also add that the district has asked the applicants in general for past variances to attempt to mitigate potential negative impacts associated with the variance. To do this, the applicants intend to build the garage using flood-proof materials in accordance with FEMA guidelines. These include constructing the building so that utilities meet vertical separation requirements and that all materials installed are classified as resistant to floodwater damage. Additionally, what the district has requested in the past on projects such as this one is that a notation of nonconformance is recorded on the title of the property, which serves to inform any future owner of the property of the variance. Thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 23534 and the subsequent variance request. I will now open it up for any questions before you take action.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Is there a motion to approve, I'm sorry, the variance first. Is there a motion to approve the variance?
So moved.
Manager Olson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hajmati. Any questions for Mr. Jonas or the contractors? Manager Olson.
I assume every structure that's on that property right now is coming down, including the one on the Harrisons. Could you go back a slide?
Yep.
Including the one by the two docks on the right side of the easement?
That's already gone, actually.
It's actually already gone. Okay, so none of what I'm seeing here is going to be
That's correct.
there. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Manager Hajmati.
This question is not about the variance as much as about my concern for protecting the people who are going to be living there. Do you feel, you're going to be moving in there and you're going to be having, take a risk? I'm hoping that you've taken adequate precautions to protect yourself in this. You're one of my neighbors in the district, so I want to be sure that you've protected yourself. So can you tell me something about the kind of protections you're taking in case, in case a flood occurs?
In case of flood, or in case a flood occurs, did you
Uh-huh.
say? So I'm the contractor, I'm not the homeowner.
Oh, okay, if you can come up here, please.
Come to the front and then
Okay,
just
sorry.
read your name and address into the record.
All right.
Manager Hajmati, I think what you're going to hear again is we have the owner's representatives here, the contractors that are designing, and Mr. Jonas had outlined the basic provisions of flood protection that are being taken for the property. The home does have separation, is outside of the floodplain, so none of the openings for the residential structure are would intersect the 100-year floodplain. The garage is built with FEMA DNR approved flood-resistant materials, and then there's going to be a notation recorded on the property for any subsequent owners that would acquire the property. With that, I'd ask if you introduce yourself and see if you can expand on the answer.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Julie Johnson, Suncrest Builders. I'm the contractor. And we've been working with the homeowners trying to get this to make sense with the land. It's a very difficult piece of land
Yes, it
because,
is.
yeah,
Very
it's
difficult piece of
flat and you've got the driveways, and there's just not a lot of, and it's not very big. So, like Trey had said, we had done the 2 foot of separation, and that wasn't adequate, or, you know,
Right.
so our
Violated one of
compromise,
the
I
other ones,
guess.
right. Mhm.
Yeah, the compromise was to raise the garage, but there's not a lot of room to slope the driveway
Right.
and keep it safe.
Yes,
Um,
I read that.
And then as far as your question for keeping the home safe,
Yes,
it's the garage that's the issue, and we're using all flood-proof materials, like Trey said, in that case too. So cement steps instead of wood steps. The doors, garage door and the service door are flood-proof materials. So just keeping that all safe in case there is a flood, which, who knows?
yeah, yes, you know, especially with climate change and things happening more rapidly these
Exactly.
days. Is there anything that, you know, anything that they store inside there that could be electrical, that, you know,
Yeah.
that protects their property?
Right, and that's another issue that we will resolve when we build anything electrical will be above that 2 foot mark.
Okay,
Any outlets that they might have in there.
right,
And then materials, they're just gonna, they have to abide by our request, I guess, that they store all those materials above that 2 foot mark also. So on shelving or, and we have talked to the homeowner about that, and they agree. They're conscientious about this too, so I don't think that that would ever be an issue.
okay,
Yeah,
all right. I think that gives me an idea of what you're doing.
okay.
Could you also, I'm sorry, state your address for the record?
Oh, 6250 Murray Hill Road, Excelsior.
Thank you. Manager Loftus, you have a question?
Yeah, do you have a sense from the homeowner, their comfort level at, you know, different scenarios? Would they be fine with standing water for weeks, or would they try and sandbag and push that water to neighboring properties, or how would they actually perform in a flood? What would be their plan?
I guess we haven't talked about it, but, you know, the garage will be sloped so that if there is standing water, I mean, that's what it's gonna be. There's, I don't think, any way to keep water out of those properties because it's so flat. So if the water does get that high, all the neighboring properties are kinda in that same,
Yeah.
I don't wanna say boat, but it could be a boat. So,
So they're fine letting their property, their asset go?
well, I think it would be fine if it's all flood-proof. I mean, that's the whole intent of this, is to build it all at a flood-proof, so it wouldn't be damaged. The current garage, detached garage, does have wood at that level right now, so it would never withstand a flood, if there was one.
And I'm sure our engineers looked at this, and can't say I've like studied the topography of the property around it, but nor are we asked to comment, but it is obviously an extremely small site. And I don't know if you're putting more structure on there than there is now, or what the deal is. That isn't for us to really comment on, but I do believe that most people would try and preserve their property. And I think it could impact the neighbors should they be out there sandbagging around this structure on a regular basis. And, well, regular basis, you know, whenever it might, hopefully not regular, but flood. And so I don't want to put them in a scenario that wouldn't work and doesn't meet the intent of the rule. I think you have a difficult site. It's a peninsula. It's low. It's flat. So I understand the difficulty, but one of the words that Manager Hejmadi mentioned was risk, and I hope you've really thought through that and talked about different scenarios with the homeowner and maybe even their insurance company. And I like the legal notation for us, and I'd like to make sure that's really ironclad, because I think there's a lot of risk in this.
Yeah, and we had talked about that too, putting that on, document that and have it go forward with, if they were to sell the
Yeah.
house. Because that's something too where whoever buys it, and they want this to be a legacy home, so it's not going to sell for a long, long time. But if it were to sell, it'd be good to have that in a notation so that people are aware and, they know what they're getting into. But these homeowners are aware of it, of course, because we've been, talking about all the scenarios. We have not talked about sandbagging, but I don't know that that would be something that, I don't know that it would help for them to sandbag anything. I just don't think that it would help if we were to have a flood, if it would do any good.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's
Yeah.
just the floods I've been a part of in Lake Minnetonka. People still valued their garages, even though they're not living in them, and still tried to protect them in 2014 when we were flooded. And they were sandbagging, and they felt that it was worth saving their garage, even though it's just a garage. So I don't know that people really think through, like, which structures are we going to save and which ones are we just going to let go.
Right.
And
Well-
so it's happened, and it will happen again.
Yeah. And the intent, I guess, is to have it be flood-proof so that if it does get water in there, that it will flow out and they'll be able to hose it out and move on. But that's the intent anyway.
Thank you. Manager Olson?
I have a quick one for you. Is the surface of the garage floor part of the floodplain?
The garage floor is located at the elevation of 932.1. So it's a little bit above the 100-year floodplain elevation
Okay.
that's needed at
So,
this thing.
so to answer your question, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were to sandbag across the front of the garage, assuming you could put plastic around the garage, you're not preventing water from going, you're preventing water from going in the garage, but the garage space is not a floodplain. See, if it was a floodplain and we said every time it floods, we're gonna have water in there, then sandbagging would be a violation. It would be restricting the floodplain. But if that surface is not considered floodplain,
No, I agree.
Yeah.
It would be a violation, but I was just
Yep.
concerned about displacing it,
okay,
directionally changing it too.
right.
Ms. Weiss, would you make a comment about the garage and the floodplain?
Yes, I can confirm that the garage is not proposed to be within the floodplain.
Thank you.
Yeah, the 931.5 and they're at 932.1.
Yep.
So it's,
Manager Hajmati?
I have a question about insurance. Will they be able to get insurance? And will they, I presume they'll get flood insurance, and they live in a floodplain, so they have to get flood. Will they be able to get it?
Well, I would suspect that other lots on Lake Minnetonka at this elevation have flood insurance, so I'm assuming that they would. I don't know if they've checked into it, to be honest.
I hope they do
Yeah, for sure.
before they move forward on this.
Yeah.
We've been far-ranging. Are there any other questions that relate specifically to the variance? Andrew Sando?
I'm sorry, my reading, is this a attached or unattached garage?
The new one is attached.
Attached, okay. And
Yeah.
then also, I think to get a mortgage, you'd probably have to get insurance.
And of course, that and the insurance are outside of our purview, of course. Anything else about the variance?
Nope.
All right, those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Then is there a motion to approve the permit with the conditions and the variance set out
So
in front
moved.
of us? Manager Olson moves. Is there a second?
Hajmani, second.
Hajmati seconds. Anything else before we vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you for coming.
President White,
Thank you.
managers.
Yeah.
Next, we have Ms. Green presenting the East Auburn Wetland Restoration Feasibility Update.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. I'm excited to share an update on the East Auburn wetland restoration feasibility from when we last discussed it at the August 10th OPC meeting. Since August, our team has received the final feasibility report, reviewed the results and recommendations, and has met with the City of Victoria and Public Works to discuss the project opportunity. Before diving into the specifics, I will provide some context that is generally as follows. I'll start by bringing everyone back up to speed by providing some project background before moving into the outcomes from the feasibility study and discussing the tentative project timeline. To begin, as a reminder, the project is located in our 6 Mile Creek Halsted base of Watershed and focuses on the East Auburn Wetland Complex in the City of Victoria. The East Auburn Wetland Complex is what we consider the entire wetland system between Wasserman Lake and East Auburn Lake, circled here in yellow. The water flows north out of Wasserman through the wetland and into East Auburn Lake. It's important to note that both of these lakes are currently listed as impaired. However, the district has invested substantially in these areas around Wasserman and within the lake itself, and for the first time in 2023 in its monitoring history, Wasserman Lake has met state standards. So when we look at the TMDL, of the required phosphorus reduction, which is represented here by the gray boxes, we need a total of 545 pounds of removal. Then assuming Wasserman Lake continues to meet state standards, we can quantify that load reduction, which comes to 162 pounds, and the Victoria Stormwater Retrofit provides 25 pounds, so there is a total of 358 pounds of removal still needed. Based on the TMDL, the remaining reductions will primarily need to come from watershed projects. The 2017 Watershed Management Plan outlined the drainage area for the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay, indicating where we need to find projects to reduce the remaining 358 pounds. During this process, the East Auburn Wetland Complex was identified as a project opportunity to not only contribute towards the remaining phosphorus reduction needs, but also pilot this wetland restoration as an opportunity for the district to learn how to address wetlands that are contributing nutrients to downstream water bodies. This is related to an ongoing conversation we have had about wetlands becoming sources once they have reached a capacity for storing nutrients. District staff then reviewed necessary data to identify the loading source by comparing the inlet and the outlet of the East Auburn wetland. The data revealed an increase in average phosphorus concentration at the outlet of the wetland, and in terms of loading, the wetland showed to be exporting 135 pounds of phosphorus to East Auburn each year. By restoring the East Auburn Wetland Complex, with the potential of achieving 135 pounds of removal, there is an opportunity to meet 55% of our removal needs, over halfway to our target of 545 pounds when combined with our current Wasserman and Victoria removal efforts. Having understood this restoration potential, our district staff began refining our understanding of the issue by layering in additional monitoring points to identify if the loading was coming from a particular cell or equally across the wetland. The data indicated that the first cell, highlighted in yellow and denoted as cell 1, was responsible for the majority of the phosphorus export, exactly 82% of it. The data also indicated that the export is driven by a wet-dry cycling of the wetland that occurs during the summer months when the wetland initially dries out and then later experiences surges of flushing during rain events. However, we still weren't certain about the exact mechanisms driving that export, which were the same questions we needed to answer to support feasibility. To ensure we captured the right information, we contracted with Stantec to answer two main questions. First, we wanted to characterize where we saw high phosphorus content in the wetland. Secondly, we wanted to know whether that high phosphorus is able to transport downstream. The monitoring plan relied on three overarching data sets that were assessed both spatially and vertically. These included soil phosphorus content, groundwater phosphorus concentration, and groundwater level data. From the soil data, we saw that the mobile phosphorus content decreases with soil depth, and the most mobile phosphorus content is seen at the surface. We also found high concentrations of phosphorus in the groundwater data, and we confirmed its ability to move downstream through the spatial analysis of lateral movement through the channel. So to summarize these results, we know that there are areas of high phosphorus in the soils. The soils are diffusing phosphorus into the groundwater, and the phosphorus-rich groundwater is able to transport downstream. Given these results and our understanding of cell 1 as the primary exporter of phosphorus driven by that wet-dry cycling, we contracted with Moore Engineering and Wetland Solutions in 2022 to conduct a feasibility study that utilized our understanding of the issue by reviewing data, literature, and modeling. The goal of this feasibility evaluation was to develop alternatives to restore portions of the wetland complex to reduce the phosphorus export to the extent feasible, while considering the permitting needs, the challenges, and an opinion of probable costs. The feasibility was completed this fall of 2023 and resulted in 7 restoration alternatives that include hydrologic restoration through the implementation of a sheet pile weir between cell 1 and cell 2 wetlands, channel elimination, channel treatment, topographic modification by regrading the wetland, topographic modification by deepening the zones and filling the channel, treating the sediment, and treating the inflow and outflow with alum. These alternatives were scored and ranked using the following criteria, including the impacts to the wetlands, the permitting complexity, the engineering complexity, the amount of phosphorus export reduction achieved, the capital costs, the operations and maintenance costs, the reduction timescale, the risks that are involved, and our ability to mitigate that risk. The output was an alternative table represented here, which resulted in a primary recommendation and a secondary recommendation. Each of these methods received a criteria ranking of 1 through 3 to provide a total score, ranking the alternatives in order from most desirable to least desirable. These values were estimated based on professional judgment and the mechanisms of export being addressed by each alternative. For communication purposes, this data was translated into a more visually interpretive format by representing the more desirable scores in green and the lesser desirable scores in red. Here we can see that based on the scoring criteria and ranking, the hydrologic restoration through the installation of a sheet pile weir received the most desirable scores across the criteria and was the highest ranked option. The next highest ranked alternatives, which tied for second, were backfilling the channel with absorptive media and sediment treatment. The hydrologic restoration method is estimated to achieve 50% of the 135 pounds of export reduction needed for East Auburn Lake. And although the hydrologic restoration does not score the highest for export reduction, our team recognizes the value in implementing this method because of its minimal costs, and even more specifically, is nearly half under budget of what is planned, while also having low engineering complexity, a strong ability to mitigate the risks, and minimal impacts to the wetland, and is the only methodology that is restoring the wetland completely to its natural state. With that being said, given the novelty of restoring nutrient exporting wetlands and our understanding of the complexity of this issue, we would implement this method initially and monitor its effectiveness for approximately 3 years before deciding whether to stack the additional restoration methods of channel treatment or sediment treatment. So to summarize, our approach based on the recommendations received would be to install the weir between cell 1 and cell 2, continue to monitor and collect the data for 3 years, before considering whether we need to include a second alternative if the weir is only successful at holding the mobile phosphorus content at the surface, and we continue to see phosphorus contents increase downstream in the channel. Following this decision, our team recently met to discuss the project opportunity with the City of Victoria, who owns the land in which the project will take place, and the City of Victoria Public Works, who owns the boardwalk and the trail through the wetland cells. The partners expressed support for the project and are excited about the opportunity to maximize the public benefit of the restoration effort by designing the weir structure in concert with the aging boardwalk that would need to be replaced during the restoration construction regardless. Our project team also recognizes the potential to strengthen our partnership with the City of Victoria by not only restoring the ecological integrity of the landscape to its natural state, but also by connecting the community to a renewed wetland waterfront which has historically been altered to an unnatural environment, presenting a unique recreation opportunity in the City of Victoria, who identifies as the City of Lakes and Parks. During our conversation, we also discussed how the district might receive authorization to access the property parcels in which the restoration would take place. Given the current unknown of exactly how the boardwalk and weir will operate together in design, the partners have agreed to provide their support for land rights through a resolution of support that will be brought before the City Council of the City of Victoria next month. And then we will later revisit the conversation with the partners during the design process to determine the appropriate agreement type for land rights with a better understanding of the design at that time. So now, having traveled us through time, I can share our road forward to project design and construction, beginning with presenting to the City of Victoria City Council in February with the resolution of support for land rights, followed by ordering the project in March and releasing the design RFP, with the plan to then have the consultant selected by May, and bid the project in the fall with construction beginning next winter. So to briefly summarize, our staff and consultants collected and analyzed data that confirmed Cell 1 is the primary exporter of phosphorus to East Auburn Lake, and that export process is driven by wet-dry cycling. The recommendations developed and scored during feasibility supported hydrologic restoration as the most feasible restoration approach to address this issue. Finally, our team reviewed the recommendations with a plan to implement the first strategy of installing the sheet pile weir between the Cell 1 and Cell 2 wetland, then later revisit the potential for additional strategies after approximately 3 years of research and monitoring. This information was discussed this month with the City of Victoria and Public Works, who expressed support for the project and are excited about the opportunity to design the weir in concert with the boardwalk replacement. They have agreed to allow access to the land through the resolution of support, with the understanding the conversation will later be revisited during design, which is anticipated to begin in March with project ordering, followed by an anticipated timeline of bidding the project this fall and kicking off construction next winter. With that being said, I would be happy to answer any questions and welcome any discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Questions? Bill?
I'm looking at that photograph right now, and I see the boardwalk. Where would the weir, in your opinion, best be located? South of the boardwalk, under the boardwalk?
President White, Manager Olson, Board of Managers, I believe the recommendation was to install the weir where the boardwalk is located between Cell 1 and Cell 2.
At that pinch point where the two uplands are closest to each other. Okay. Is that our boardwalk design, the replacement boardwalk, or is that going to be the city's plan?
I think Mike may be able to answer
Mr.
that.
Beeman?
Manager Olson, Share Right Managers, the plan as of right now would have been to install the weir absent boardwalk reconstruction.
Correct.
But, or however, in talking with the city, so we could locate it either north or south of that boardwalk, we would look at that through design. However, in conversations with the city, they're having issues with the boardwalk. It's heaving, as you saw in some of the photos. The trails leading to it are all in relatively good shape. They have some minor cracking and potholing they want to repair. But there would be an opportunity to view the sheet pile weir as potentially an opportunity to cantilever something off of it. Likely wouldn't have to be a wood structure any longer. You're going to have, 15 to 70 foot depth in some instances, dependent upon the final design of that sheet pile, which would have the structural integrity to hold something, but that would be explored during design and when they would make a decision as to whether to invest in a different trail alternative.
Yeah, because I've heard lots of talk about how great the boardwalk is up at the park that we put in compared to this one. And the thought is that we know what we're doing, and the truth is we're still learning. So I just wanted to make sure that those considerations come up with a bulletproof boardwalk.
Yeah, Manager Olson, Chair managers, that it would be a fun exploration in terms of an ability to potentially use a sheet pile, a steel structure, to have a trail simply cross it, knowing that the structural stability would be there. But we haven't done that before either, and so we'd have to do some exploration with the design team. And we'll be revising the RFP to reflect that, so an early schematic understanding, so we could give the city something to make a decision on.
Okay, so the weir is going to keep the bad water settling on that side until we completely scope out over the years the best solution, and it's going to act like a clarifier in a sense and let the better water through.
Yeah, Manager Olson, Chair managers, the intent is really to prevent the wet-dry cycling. So what's happening in that channel is once we get to the dry periods of midsummer, the groundwater is actually making its way into the channel, and with it bringing
all that stuff.
And then it has a straight bypass down to East Auburn. So and it's a ditched channel. It's a hydraulic manipulation. It used to be a sheet flow wetland. So to Sophia's point, it would be the only solution where we're actually returning it to more of a natural state where it's just going to sheet flow through the wetland. We would have the weir notched, so we could control that elevation if we're seeing during storm cycles or other precipitation events having a potential pulse of phosphorus through the system. We could adjust the weir at that time.
Terrific.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah,
Manager Hejmati?
I was just trying to understand the mechanism. So it's basically to settle the stuff back down and have the pure water go past the weir.
Yeah, or even Manager Hejmati, managers, even more, I think more simplistically is to keep the wetland wet. And under most conditions, we should see the improvement would essentially be that we're preventing the groundwater that's rich in phosphorus from flowing through the sediments into the channel and then just having its conveyance immediately downstream. So instead, you're keeping the channel inundated, therefore keeping the groundwater stable in the sediments and not having the pulse. The challenge there, and to Sophia's point about the novelty of this, is we have seen, and Brian has worked on other projects where in practice it works, but then you get maybe storm events or surges where it flushes the system and you'll have a pulse, an increase in concentration over a short period of time. So by notching the weir, if we can predict when that would occur, you'd be able to hopefully manage for that as well. And after monitoring for 3 years, the other ideal alternative that you could stack with this is to actually treat the sediment that is holding that phosphorus so it can no longer make its way out. And there's a couple mechanisms that we've looked at with that, but initially I think it makes the most sense to first restore the hydrology and monitor the impact of that.
And then decide later what to do with it, because the phosphorus is still there. What do you do with it? Where do you put it?
Yeah, and managers, the goal is to keep the phosphorus there. This wetland and the elevations or the levels of phosphorus in the wetland are all historic. Coming from Wasserman Lake, that 4-cell wetland, what we've seen is this first cell essentially acted as a sump. It was the initial deposit for all the phosphorus leaving Wasserman Lake. With the improvements to Wasserman, we know we've essentially, in theory, turned off the phosphorus source coming into the wetland, so now we'll just keep this wetland as the location. There were some benefits also talked about in the feasibility report where having increased water levels we're likely to have a stronger plant community, and that may uptake some of the phosphorus as well. So we'll be watching a variety of the responses in the wetland. The challenge with treating the sediment is, if you look at that aerial, is to actually get an alum chemical application to the sediment is quite difficult. We'd have to
Yes.
be doing some burning, some mowing, and still hoping that we're able to get the chemical or the material to the sediments. The alternative is you could treat just the channel itself, and it's a fraction of the cost, and see if that prevents the phosphorus from making its way into the channel through the groundwater. So we're looking at the stacked benefits once we see how the system responds to the weir first.
So it's a very complex system, and there's no real clear direction. From what I watched in the table that you put up, they were all, the positive and negatives and positives and negatives.
Yeah, and manager and commodity managers, this is really an opportunity, I think, for the district to learn about source wetlands. So when they become, as Sophia noted, this wetland is now a source of phosphorus downstream. Historically, it was the sink, the place where the phosphorus was able to accumulate. We have these systems all around our watershed because of just the historic impact of the watershed. This is one that's a manageable size where we can test a few different methods or mechanisms, see how the system responds, and then potentially look to other systems where we can have a greater impact. If you're thinking Painter Creek subwatershed, for instance, which is wetland dominant, and we know that there's a significant or substantial amount of phosphorus coming from those systems, but they're also 3 to 10 times the size of this wetland system.
Has this been done in other parts of the country?
That's a great question. We talked a lot about that with the design or the feasibility team, more in wetland solutions. There have been a variety of different methods throughout the state and the country, all with mixed results. So everyone's kind of trying new. I think there's a variety of new opportunities people are looking at. One would be, sediment treatment. Historically, the solution was just dredge the wetland. But in this instance, it's 30 feet of sediment or soil that has phosphorus. It's containing phosphorus, so it's not really a feasible alternative. So looking at these other options, I think we'll be watching it closely along with the variety of other consultants and academics.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Manager Olson?
Just as a side note, were the two consultants amicable with each other, or did they debate?
Yeah, the team was a lot of fun, actually. It was Moore Engineering, who's local,
Yeah.
Wetland Solutions, which is actually a Florida firm,
Okay.
but has a connection through Jeff Medaychek, who was the project manager for Moore. They worked together on a bunch of wetland restorations in Florida years ago. And then actually, Dr. Nathan Johnson, who is a nutrient and sediment cycling expert up at the University of Minnesota Duluth, who's actually I believe Brian's advisor back in the day. And so it was some of the conversations I just right past me when they really would get going on some of the nutrient cycling and what we would be looking for and the anoxic conditions that we're going to create.
Do you know what? Did you know Johnson too? Because you were in.
Manager Olson, I am familiar with Dr. Nate Johnson. Yes, I didn't work with him directly, but he was in council of some committees that I served on during my time in Duluth.
Great presentation, because there was a lot of complexity that I wasn't familiar with. And you laid it out so that we can understand it a lot better, so appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Manager Loftus?
I was going to comment on very good presentation as well. Thank you. And then to all the staff who contributed, I really love your decision matrix and the color coding and all the different criteria you laid into it. I think that's really important, or I value that as someone who wants to support where you're going with it. All the factors being considered gives me a lot of comfort and a lot of knowledge looking at that, so I appreciate it. Thank you. For my own education, though, there was one criteria called reduction time scale. I'm not aware of what that is. Could you just
Yeah.
educate me?
Absolutely, Manager Loftus, Chair White Managers. So the reduction timescale we were looking at was how quickly will you actually achieve a reduction in phosphorus moving downstream?
Okay.
So what has the, so Alan.
So it's
for
your
instance,
timeline.
It's the timeline for how quick you.
But you
see
made
a
it sound
response.
really smart. Okay. Got it. It's your timeline,
Give
your
me
time
turn-
frame.
Give me
Okay.
turn it off.
All right, okay.
But in
Thank
some
you.
instances, they're immediate, and in others, you may not see a response until, over a period of time.
Got it.
So weighing
That
that
makes sense.
against the ability to mitigate.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Anything
all
else?
the work that went into it and study. Very good.
We are very well informed. Thank you, Ms. Green.
Yes. Thank you.
Next up is the administrator's report. I want to take just a moment to ask you, Manager Hajmati, if you wanted to add anything about our meeting with Commissioner Conley.
No.
Okay, thank you. Then over to you, Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, Chair White, managers, sorry, I'm not sure why I was distracted there. Just to kind of cover the bases again, and hearing it out loud, it feels like it's been a busy couple of weeks in terms of community connections, and I think it has. We were in front of the interest to City Council, warm reception there. It's interesting to learn about what their priorities are, and I think they're very excited about the work that we've done upstream, the work that we've done at 6 Mile Marsh Prairie. I think there's still strong interest in a spring tour of some sorts, and as President White mentioned, interest in seeing us initiate technical, financial, operational feasibility discussions around the alum dosing facility. So as a good connection, as you mentioned, we've had a variety of connections over the last 3 to 4 weeks with the county commissioners, Commissioner Fernando, Conley Green, talked about the downstream Minneapolis work, the work at 325 Blake Road, and gotten, I think, good reception there on both fronts. Commissioner Conley seemed particularly pleased to hear how far along we are in 325 Blake Road and understanding how the Greenway supports water quality improvements downstream in Minneapolis, and also that we're bringing the program to Minneapolis as well, and had some good suggestions. I think across the county commissioners, universal advice with regards to 325 Blake Road was, please talk to Patricia Fitzgerald and our community works and housing staff, which we have a good relationship with, just to evaluate any programs that might support the development moving into the next phase, knowing that the City Council is considering bonding. I think among the topics that they piqued their interest and that they've been studying themselves is the topic of commercial affordability for small startups, and I think that caught their eye as it relates to the food hall, with there being multiple different potential vendors in there. And I just think having an interest in ensuring any solution that Lattice proposes there is sustainable into the future. So it's nice to know that they're really paying attention and still supportive and wanting to see this thing go, this development cycle. So that's probably a good segue into just where things are at with 325 Blake Road. The City Hopkins Council had a work session within the last 2 weeks. I've sort of lost track of all the meetings. And then there was Planning Commissioner, Planning and Zoning, and then we had a meeting this week with Community Development staff. And across all 3 groups, there seems to be some a level of clarity around the request and some support. I think we'd say we're cautiously optimistic that there's support from the council for bonding. Definitely seemed to be a lot of excitement in the Planning Commission. So I think, what's the timeline for that, Mike? Sometime in the next 4.5 to 6 weeks that this will be in front of City Council for formal decision?
Yeah, so we'll be presenting our project to City Council on February 6th. They'll do a first reading of the bonding and PUD on the 13th, and a decision on the 21st.
So all shall be revealed. We also, this week, as it relates to the Hennepin County Commission, there was a consideration of board appointments. Early in January, the Operation and Administrations Committee of the County Board heard recordings from candidates. I think there were about 8 total candidates. 3 had obtained municipal nominations, making them eligible under the new interpretation of law. Our 2 incumbents Manager Sando and President White, and then Steve Kramer, former executive director of the Minneapolis Downtown Council, who obtained a nomination from Minneapolis. So this Tuesday, those were considered. I tuned in to watch that. With District 6 commissioner absent, there's only 6 commissioners. President White was reappointed, 6-0. Manager Sando and Steve Kramer split the votes, 3-3, and the board chair moved to lay that decision over into February at February 6th. So Steve and I spoke after the meeting, a little bit of a nail biter. We'll see where the county goes at their next meeting in February. So there's a pulse on the appointments. And I think the end of term is March 8th. So they're sort of a little bit ahead of schedule from what I've seen usually, tackling those in January. I think that's been part of their track record of pushing up the application process in mid-December and tightening up the process. So we will anxiously stay tuned there. In St. Louis Park, the Northside Park project, aka the Lifetime Project, received favorable bids. This is in St. Louis Park's capable hands now. As a quick reminder, the project includes installation of a MTD, manufactured treatment device. So it's a half-buried vault and some sort of cartridge filter design that's going to do nutrient removal. Low responsive bid came in 40 grand under budget at around 373. Yay, good news. And that's fully funded through lifetime funds that are sitting in escrow. So I think we were anxiously awaiting the bids, because if they'd have come back higher, there would have been a gap funding question between escrow and what the city or Watershed's appetite would to be plugging that gap. So I think from what I've heard from Mike, St. Louis Park City Council would consider awarding the bids February 5th, assuming they would, because they came in favorable. The project would get into construction end of February and should wrap up end of March. It's a pretty punchy 3 to 4 week construction schedule. So that would bring our many-year odyssey of planning on how to use those lifetime dollars to a neat conclusion, and we can do some outreach and communications around that. And I would just say on the record, thank our partners at St. Louis Park for a smooth handoff into the bid and construction oversight process. What else? I met just today actually with Park Board and Minneapolis staff leadership to just discuss the status of our partnership. We're on track, knock on wood. We will be getting the cooperative agreement, the request for proposals, and steering committee appointments through both the Park Board and the City Council by the end of March. It's going to take a little bit of work, I think, just in terms of attendance. With the Park Board, we're going to be in front of them February 21st, if that's a Wednesday, March 6th, and March 20th. It's going to take 3 steps to brief them on the partnership, bring some technical information forward, and then get them to actually authorize execution of the agreement. And then we'll do a 2-step process with Minneapolis, bringing it through Climate and Infrastructure Committee in February, and then full City Council in March, and we'll be on some sort of track. So that's 7 meetings to get a cooperative agreement approved between our 3 agencies, but that's going to be the road that we've chosen to hoe. Trying to really bring partnership between Minneapolis, the Park Board, and the district. So still remain really excited about that. And then pending the authorization, we'd be tracking toward the steering committee meeting in May or June, and we'd be checking in on the cooperative agreement's finished, the request for proposals is out. I think we're going to try and push for a proof point on this management unit concept. Maybe look at the Cedar Lake and try and quickly crank out a management unit plan that looks like our Long Lake Creek roadmap, just to kind of show them this is where we're going. And then the third piece would be a skeleton of a communications plan, so that we're actionable on the short-term work, the long-range work, and that we're kind of continuing to funnel the communications together. So that's where we stand on that. 2 more quick updates. We were recently engaged by Monarch Development, LLC, regarding land that they have under control along County Road 110, south of 15. This is in the city of Mound on the west side of what's called Lost Lake. Quick background, the city's 2040 plan carries forward what I think is their long-held vision of a city of creating a lake destination, kind of a la Excelsior or Wayzata, more actively linking the Lost Lake wetland to Lake Minnetonka and supporting a vibrant downtown with mixed-use development. Part of that vision and the developer's pro forma, from what I can understand, in their purchase price for this land includes expansion of navigational access, more docks for the proposed townhomes in an area which is all wetland, and that would maybe require dredging. And navigational use in that area and expansion of use was considered quite a while ago. I think there was some level of dialogue, active dialogue around it, am I right, between the city and the DNR and the district in the early 2000s as they looked to do condo and townhome development down there and create a municipal dock space. So to articulate the vision that they have and discuss regulatory constraints and strategy, the developers requested a meeting among the mayor, LMCD board members, Representative Andrew Myers, who used to be on the city council, and also President White, and then regulatory staff from the Corps, DNR, LMCD, city, and district. So should be an exciting meeting. We have had a number of phone conversations and are leaning in to help plan and facilitate that meeting, since we know our regulatory partners and have a history in downtown Mound where we invested in their park and ride, a bunch of rain gardens, Walner baseball field where we did one of the first porous concrete demonstration sites in the state, all of which was green infrastructure wrapped around their past push for downtown development and dock and navigational expansion. So this is sort of like phase 3 or 5. I think we've communicated clearly there's some challenges there in expanding future dredging, and so we'll report back on that conversation. And maybe other board members around the lake have context or questions about that. So as I move on to the next thing and catch my breath, if you want to weigh in or have questions for me.
Where would you hold such a huge meeting if you had the whole?
Well, that's a good question. I was more focused on what, how to run the meeting, what the outcomes were. So I don't know how big is Mound City Hall. That's probably where we're going to end up.
Because you said the whole LMCD board, right?
No, an LMCD board member. I
Oh,
think
board
it,
member.
Benjamin.
All I heard was board.
Yeah, Ben Brandt is the Mound
Okay.
representative, I believe.
Then you're good.
It's a smaller group than all 14 board members.
Mound City Manager retired recently, have they
That's right.
hired?
I skipped over that. So Eric Hoverston had a planned retirement from the city of Mound, and so they have a new person from a new city manager. Cologne, thank you, yeah. That just started 10 days ago. So it'll be our first introduction to him as well. So a good opportunity to do some relationship building with the mayor, Representative Meyer, and the city manager. And the last thing, we were talking about boardwalks in the city of Victoria, and I want to give a quick update on the Preserve Boardwalk. We are making methodical progress, and I know we've said that before. I feel like we are putting one foot in front of the other right now. In the last 2 weeks, we've gotten shop drawings and engineering calculations from the contractor and their engineering support and manufacturer for a joist extension bracket, which would be a metal bracket that goes on the end of a joist, to address the issue of gaps of a certain dimension, bigger than 5/8, less than 1 1/4 between the joist and the header. So that's one of the outstanding issues. And the restrained bearing plates, which would address vertical gaps. Essentially, the joist sitting too low in a low hanger, so they're metal shims. And those have both been reviewed, shop drawings, narrative, calculations, and accepted by SRF pending a field test where we test methods. So on an engineering basis, the calcs, the drawings are there. We need to see how these would be installed to see if it's actually practically implemented. So we are at a stage where we've reopened dialogue with the city building officials. I talked to the interim building official today. The principal one's out on leave. And they've been really helpful in just mapping out what the submittal requirements are, what they expect in a paper package. I've been anxious to not trickle information in. We want to give them a whole complete package and get one round of review. And then also they've given us good guidelines on designing the field test, where they, how many locations, what we're looking for, what are the criteria, how it's going to be documented. So they're really kind of signaling they want strong paperwork and they want to test methods, and that's how they might possibly get to yes on alternatives under the state building code. So I feel a little bit more optimistic than in past reports. I feel like we're closer. We've also begun reaching out, which we've done in the past, to request a direct face-to-face meeting with our contractor, and he's welcome to bring his attorney, to discuss the submittal package to the city, the field test design, and the installation plan. We really need to coordinate so that we're not just having this slow back and forth email exchange. And so I think we're at a stage now where the engineering review's got traction. We need to sit down and really collaborate on the contents of these plans that JTS needs to own, and then the timeline with which we want to get those scheduled and completed, the field test. So if my hope would be to report in 2 weeks that we've started the city submittal process, that we've finalized the field testing plan and begun scheduling to get in the field and test, and that we have had a sit down or at least opened dialogue, and we've scheduled a meeting with JTS. So that's kind of where we stand on that. It continues to be slower than everybody would want, but we are moving. And that about rounds things out for this edition of your administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker.
It's a lot.
Manager Hajmati?
Is the, it's $100 a day?
Yeah.
Is that still continuing?
That's right. The liquidated damages are running.
Okay.
And so are the engineering fees for our engineer's time and our legal fees for our legal time.
Okay. Are you getting any pushback on that?
Not
From-
directly, because there's
from
no
either
direct
contract-
dialogue. I mean, I'm certain that they're not pleased with that package of fees, but that is, you know, what it is. I am happy that we've seen the submittals come in, because remember we had 11 defective work categories. 9 of the 11 they've committed to bringing to plan and spec. So really, as a refresher, what we're talking about is there's 2 areas where they're proposing to do something different than plan. And it has been painfully slow to get them to make a submittal of what that alternative would be with enough detail in engineering and drawings for us to be able to review and approve. The next big test, I think, that would give us a signal that there's an intention to follow this through to completion would be a meeting and after the field test, an actual installation plan that commits to schedule. Because if you imagine they're going to have to do this in chunks, 2-week sections where they've got enough materials to open it up, find what they need to find, implement this cascading suite of solutions across 11 defective work categories, and then move to the next one. So I think we're fairly certain they're not happy about the cost. Neither are we. And but I have been pleased that the submittals have come in, because it means that something's moving. And the next test, I think, that would give us some reason for hope here is the field test and opening dialogue directly with the contractor.
Anything else for Mr. Whisker?
Good work, thanks.
We are adjourned. Thank you.